It is indeed a great pleasure to warmly welcome you to this special webcast, which aims to effectively implement and officially launch the comprehensive education and communication platform of the Project for Strengthening Local and Community Capacities against Various Natural Threats, which is being implemented by UNESCO with generous funding from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Japan, focusing its activities specifically on the beautiful Caribbean islands. This educational platform features a comprehensive and detailed massive online course known as a MOOC, which is complemented by a series of webinars aimed at analyzing the links between threats, vulnerability, and disaster risks with a people-centered approach. We have a way to learn from the lessons already present in the Caribbean and thus strengthen the capacities for a wide audience that includes decision makers, middle management, professionals from disaster risk management agencies in the countries, members of civil society organizations, as well as members of educational communities, churches, and also citizens committed to mitigating the physical and psychological impact on people, especially during times when they must face a natural threat, which is the central focus of this project. A brief account shows us, as precisely depicted in the image, according to the detailed work of Professor Toblin from the University of the West Indies, that there are historical records of the impact of hurricanes dating back to 1722, when one devastating hurricane struck the city of Kingston and much of the island of Jamaica. However, a significant milestone might be the catastrophic hurricane that developed in October 1780, when it is estimated that over 20,000 people tragically died in the Lesser Antilles, the southern part of Puerto Rico, and also in the Dominican Republic. This hurricane is now understood to be the first Category 5 hurricane, according to new, more accurate scales for analyzing damage and wind speed. These weather systems are composed of large-scale tropical depressions, as you can see, which manifest during what is known as the hurricane season, between the months of May and November each year. They constitute one of the most destructive threats the world must face due to their manifestation, intensity, and especially the impact they have on people and their property, as well as on terrestrial ecosystems that are completely transformed. For example, the impact on fish in the oceans or the destruction of vegetation cover precisely due to the intensity of these types of events. The records of storms over the past 70 years show, as you can see in this image, the various events that have taken place throughout the year, with hurricanes and tropical storms in different categories, which, as you can see, move throughout the entire season. This somehow shows us the temporal variability of the event, and the last one precisely shows the situation of the past year. But just as there is a significant distribution over time with very high hurricane categories, it is also possible to see that all these hurricanes show a fairly random spatial movement pattern, and therefore it is impossible to see or predict the mobility of these events with sufficient anticipation. In any case, it is possible to analyze how, in some way, it is feasible to simply use a long-term forecast to estimate the possible number of events, and from there determine what preparations could be made to advance with defining measures. Satellite images of Hurricane Ida, for example, a Category 4 hurricane from August 2021, show, as can be seen in the image, how these complex cloud systems, which are collections of water droplets or ice crystals suspended in the atmosphere, essentially form a large vortex, which is a swirling mass of fluid with a spiral motion, spiraling and generating enormous energy, which contributes to extreme weather conditions by taking up water vapor and creating this feedback loop of vapor, a process where the output of a system influences its own input, and this enormous cycle and speed of the spirals. This results, on one hand, in the increase of sea levels with storms, as can be seen through the network of drones, unmanned aerial vehicles equipped with advanced sensors that the US now has. Nautical drones, which clearly see, measure, and record the marine dynamics generated by this type of event, as well as these winds when they reach coastal areas, which in many cases, like Hurricane Ida, are Category 4, with winds ranging between 200 and 250 kph. They first affect with the wind, as can be seen in the graph, but they also generate storm surges that have a devastating effect on the people living in coastal areas. In hurricanes of such great impact, the information can be completely destroyed. So what are, in essence, the potential and possible consequences of all this? Well, obviously, the consequences are indeed very serious, especially for people, as they show the vulnerability we have in the face of these types of events. It is also important to consider that the enormous speed of these processes generates the movement of projectiles as they lift wood, pieces of roofs, etc., which are sometimes much more dangerous than any type of direct consequence of the wind, which can be extremely severe. In response to this, the authorities have made very concrete decisions over the past few decades, essentially aiming to define an organizational framework to address these issues. On one hand, they seek to promote the preservation of human life, infrastructure, and very importantly, tourism, which is one of the key socioeconomic activities for Caribbean countries and is vital for their economy. Additionally, agriculture is also a significant focus. For example, detailed information, such as this case of a beach in Barbados, where the area that could be impacted by a hurricane is identified, or where evacuation routes for such an event are specified. It is worth noting that in 2022, the United Nations Secretary launched a new and significant initiative called Climate Action, which includes a strong commitment to have an early warning system for everyone. As can be clearly seen in the image, this involves detailed information collected from terrestrial systems, comprehensive data from satellites, and, most importantly, the preservation of people, aiming to clearly establish effective survival strategies. But as you can see in the image on the bottom left, the key is information and communication. And this is indeed somewhat the objective of this project, which seeks to clearly emphasize these two dimensions. These are, after all, the missions that UNESCO has within the United Nations system, that is how alerts are truly disseminated, and of course communication, so that people can precisely prepare to address these types of processes and reduce the impact. It is within this framework that UNESCO seeks to promote one of its missions and initiatives, which is to initiate and launch education through media as a process in which people become literate not only through conventional education, but also through the use of new and advanced training linked to social networks, the use of cell phones, and techniques for the impact of messages from social networks and digital platforms. This approach allows for a much closer and more effective reach to precisely reduce the impact of disasters caused by natural threats and other modern communication tools. It is within this framework that both the comprehensive and massive online course being launched from this event and the series of seminars aim to empower individuals, especially to support decision-making during the most critical and pivotal moments, that is, when such an event is taking place, so they can truly have the tools, resources, and information that allow them to establish the best self-protection strategies. It is within this framework, in this context, that we would like to commence this webcast. And first of all, I would like to introduce the esteemed and distinguished Dr. Selmira May, who is with us. Selmira is highly experienced and skilled in science at the University of the Republic in Montevideo, Uruguay. He has a master's in management, education from Lumber, and studied education, innovation, and improvement at the University of Michigan in the USA. She is in charge of the education area for various Latin American countries. But above all, she is the coordinator of the management group of the Risk Management Unit at the UNESCO office in Montevideo and the technical director, the director of the project that is the subject of this presentation. So it is indeed my pleasure to introduce a person with whom I have had the opportunity to work for many years, and of course, to truly know their capabilities. It is indeed my pleasure to introduce Selmira. Welcome, Selmira.
Thank you, Marcelo. Well, it is indeed an absolutely really great pleasure to greet you and also to greet everyone who is and will be enjoying, hopefully, this conversation we have about how to start presenting this project. I think it's like the launch of a comprehensive series, a detailed cycle of in-depth talks on various important aspects of risk management that we will be sharing with you throughout this year in an extensive and thorough manner. All right, maybe if you give me the floor, I can start explaining the how and why of this project in a bit more detail and clarity. I will now share with you what we consider the important and significant highlights of the project, which aims to strengthen local and community capacities against various and diverse natural threats in the country and beyond. As Marcelo mentioned, it is indeed a significant initiative backed by the government of Japan, and although it focuses on 5 Caribbean countries, which are St. Lucia, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, the Bahamas, the Dominican Republic, and Haiti, its main objective at the end of this comprehensive project is to share all results as well as products with other member island states of the Caribbean region and beyond, because we know that this issue not only affects the Caribbean, but also several other territories in our broader region and beyond. So let me share with you how and why exactly this particular project came about. Well, you see, the Caribbean region is one of the regions most severely threatened by the impacts of extreme weather conditions and hydrological phenomena, and particularly, as is well known, tropical storms, hurricanes, and other related events. Following the recent hurricanes that impacted the Caribbean, UNESCO has expressed a significant interest in addressing certain aspects, particularly focused on improving the resilience of these countries and especially their populations in various ways. As we were saying, the Caribbean, due to its location, and especially, as Marcelo mentioned, because many activities, particularly economic activities, are concentrated in coastal areas, is especially susceptible and vulnerable to the impacts of these phenomena. This positions the Caribbean as the second most disaster-prone region in the world. What were the challenges, or what did we identify as challenges for this project? Well, as we were saying, and Marcelo also mentioned at the beginning, we have and rely on a lot of technology. And over the years, UNESCO has also focused a lot on structural solutions, especially those coming from innovation and technology and from engineering and also from other fields as well. But over the many years, with the increasingly frequent and common occurrence of these phenomena in greater numbers and with greater intensity, which has been verified and documented, we saw the need to work closely with people. As I was saying, this means preparing people to be more resilient, especially not because we can prevent them from happening, but so that they are better prepared. In fact, actually, so above all, the project aims to focus on people's abilities to protect themselves and ensure the safety and well-being of the individuals and the communities they are located in. For this, we believed, and we are clearly proving it and translating it into actions, that education in various forms and methods and communication are key to making people understand the messages, decode those messages, and generate greater resilience and better responses to events of natural origin. Education and communication are essential components as they help individuals and communities better interpret information, adequately prepare, and efficiently respond to natural events. So again, there they are located on the geographical map, which are the primary focus countries, what the main objective is, which is to significantly strengthen individual and community capacities, but not only in response to the central and primary axis that are severe tropical storms and intense hurricanes. But we understand that through a more adequately prepared population, we will achieve that people are better prepared to effectively respond to the unexpected occurrence of any extreme weather phenomenon. And we have also been verifying this throughout the development of the project, as it is not only hurricanes and tropical storms that impact these small territories, but there are also other natural phenomena that unfortunately do so as well, causing not only human losses, but also significant economic losses for territories that are already highly vulnerable. So now let me tell you about the steps we have taken and the ones we have pending throughout this entire year of our ongoing project. Obviously, the first step was to identify who our direct and indirect beneficiaries were so that they can fully understand what the potential risks are, what their impacts and consequences are, or the impacts of these phenomena, and therefore have a better capacity to withstand and recover as human beings, as individuals, as a society, and as a community as a whole. So it is always those populations that are most exposed, the most vulnerable for various reasons. The communities, we talk about children. We also talk about the role of the media in how they inform and how they manage through their massive reach to the population to help build this resilience. We talk about the authorities that are directly involved in the territorial response, such as those are, let's say, essentially, basically our direct working audience. Obviously, UNESCO is not doing this alone. We have key international partners, and that is why we are working directly, especially with national emergency response authorities and other actors who are clearly also involved due to their own activities. We are particularly focusing on the local level with civil society organizations that work very closely in direct response during, before, and after the occurrence of an extreme event. Obviously, UNESCO and its offices spread across the territory, undoubtedly, other sister agencies of the United Nations that have specific work in this area, and regional organizations such as SIDS, which work in each of these countries and connect all the countries with each other through regional policies, regional strategies, and regional initiatives. Through them, we are accomplishing specific support in various ways in the implementation of the project, and we are also learning from many things that have happened over the years and continue to happen. We are not starting this project from scratch. There is already a lot of work done in the countries, and we do not want to overlook that fact. Obviously, we key actors are thinking, as I already mentioned, about these various populations that we identify as more vulnerable, such as women's networks, youth networks, educational actors, all community leaders, and churches, which we also know play a really fundamental role in all stages before, during, and after an event. We are in contact with them as well because, again, we want to learn from reality, from what already exists, in order to provide new solutions and bring new proposals that really complement those already in place. And then, obviously, clearly and undoubtedly, there are experts we are relying on to carefully and meticulously develop the project in many of the various product developments and inputs we are diligently working on, and especially later, once we finally reach the completion of the implementation, to be able to effectively showcase what is being done. Again, I think I said it several times, but we definitely believe it is important for the project to bring new issues and leave new learnings, and for those learnings to be shared beyond the time and territorial scope of the project. Absolutely. This is to inform you that the project had a phase, an initial stage that involved understanding where we stood, understanding what was there, understanding what was missing, knowing what each of the countries had in terms of recognition, knowledge of what these extreme phenomena meant, how they impacted them, what strategies existed, etc. In other words, a lot of what we call fieldwork, desk review, which is a state-of-the-art review of existing knowledge in the countries and regions, to then start working collaboratively with the authorities on what specifically needed to be developed anew, how we could effectively take advantage of what already existed, update it comprehensively, share it widely according to the specific needs, and then move on to try to compare it thoroughly, share it and compare it extensively, I would say, with the countries and their people, with the people who are in the territory and regions. We call this participatory activities. There are some examples of what we have been doing over these 2 years, which involved various field visits by the project team and interviews with different stakeholders and meetings to be able to exchange with them not only what we had been able to gather in those field visits, what we had verified, but also to get feedback from these authorities who are the competent authorities and are the ones who know what is really happening in the territory, and together be able to identify what was there and what was needed. In fact, the work plan for this entire year of this project, which will result in countless concrete inputs, stems from a meeting where we agreed with each of these nations on what they were entirely lacking, what more we needed to know, and what all these communities really needed in order just simply so as to be much better prepared. So we think it's important to highlight this because the project is one that has had a lot of back and forth, and it recognizes the work done by the countries and is also supported by that. Let's say that the third step is this identification of experiences and lessons learned, which we will be documenting and which will be translated, as I mentioned, into a multitude of products related to policy recommendations to be able to inform country strategies, plans, etc., on how they should redirect or sustain their public policies, aiming for that resilience, that better resilience of people and communities. A series of webinars, which is very extensive, that we are now going to tell you about, and which arises from this back and forth that I mentioned to you, the development of a massive open online course, as Marcelo mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, and which has to do with this possibility of massively reaching a large audience, redundancy aside, because we understand that we must establish a baseline of knowledge so that all those who are interested or somehow involved in risk management can extremely improve their knowledge and understanding. Then there are specific training courses, many of them at the request of the countries themselves, for specific groups within the countries, and a series of technical documents. All of this will be set up on an open platform because we understand that these products, as I have mentioned several times, can be utilized not only by other countries, other small islands, or even continental countries that have much to gain from what is being generated, but also because we understand that this information is not necessarily available today, nor is it systematized or freely accessible, and therefore in various ways and in many cases as well. So this makes us see the significant value in making all these deliverables open, free, and extremely accessible to an audience that goes far beyond the project's target. However, it is primarily focused on our target audience. Well, today we are in this introductory webcast, but from here on, as we mentioned, there will be the MOOC, which has 4 modules. As Marcelo also mentioned, a series of webinars is indeed being developed, which will take some time from now until almost the end of the year, because the interest in these conversations, these talks, these exchanges has been great. And then, as I also mentioned, there are specific activities, some webinars that are not necessarily of general interest, but have obviously arisen due to demands from groups within the countries. Some courses are also specific because we understand that while small islands have and face similar issues, some have specific and unique needs and challenges in particular. And then a series of interviews, podcasts, these types of resources that we understand are attractive in today's world, that are readily available and easily and effortlessly accessible, easy to incorporate, and attract the audience we want to reach, which is not necessarily an expert audience, a more technical audience, or an academic one, but rather the general population. The online course, the MOOC, has 4 modules that, well, as you can see there, are related to the understanding of various disasters, risk and management, and various other aspects linked to preparedness and response. Another specific aspect pertains to building resilience in various contexts and scenarios, and finally, innovative strategies to address emergencies. So there's no need for me to go through each topic one by one, but I think you can see that it's very interconnected in various ways and perspectives in terms of how we understand it, how we fully comprehend it. Some additional aspects that help us be better prepared, building resilience, strategies, education, and thoroughly a culture of prevention from all stakeholders. Again, this is not focused, it is not an academic course, but rather a highly practical course that aims for all of us to have a similar level of knowledge. And then tools, because we think it's important to provide tools, especially for decision makers, but there are also tools for people, for individuals. Regarding the webinar series, as you can see there, I was saying it is extremely intense, but it deals with issues that came up in conversations with the countries, such as home safety, that is what happens during an event, how we prepare, how we handle it, and how we recover in the best possible way. This also includes, as you can see, another webinar that deals with the psychological impact and, in fact, how to manage strategies to handle the impact that the occurrence of such a phenomenon has on each of us and significantly affects the overall well-being. Also related to the topic of information, this issue is so present and pervasive, but it also has fundamental importance when we talk about various phenomena that impact and put our lives and property at risk during emergencies, protocols that help us manage risk with a gender perspective. Information is crucial in understanding and addressing these issues effectively. We must consider the role of information in shaping our responses and strategies. There is evidence that the role of women in communities and families in various ways makes them especially vulnerable, but it also puts them in a position where we need to provide them with tools to respond in the best possible way in their respective roles in society and responsibilities in different situations and circumstances. Then regulations that pertain to the inclusion and specific protection of people in greater situations of vulnerability, such as people with disabilities, among others. Then support for educators who sometimes have the opportunity to reach a large number of individuals, from the youngest to those who are not so young, with additional resources and support in various educational settings, including both formal and informal education. So how do we prepare and train them in various ways to have the tools to educate, to teach effectively and efficiently, to help learn how to better understand and react to the occurrence of an extreme event in different scenarios and respond appropriately? And the grand finale, as we approach the end of the year, will be to use this innovative and engaging concept related to play, how to learn effectively and efficiently through play, using play as a tool to better manage and mitigate risks. So this is an overview of both the contents of the MOOC and the webinar series. Also, as we mentioned, as previously discussed, there will be a series of various specific activities that are requested by the countries. There is a webinar on geological risks due to what happened with the volcanic eruptions, which is a topic perhaps not so well known in the Caribbean region, and their implications and how they affect local communities. Therefore, we find it especially important to bring experience, knowledge, and expertise to the subregion in order to be better prepared for the risks of geological origin, such as earthquakes and landslides. Can this phenomenon also be linked to seismic events or earthquakes? And if so, why not consider it? Comprehensive training courses for local risk managers. Also, an extensive series of interviews and podcasts with in-depth risk management experts, both from the Caribbean and from outside the region. We also understand that another objective of the project must be to bring high-level and highly skilled, extremely experienced and knowledgeable insights to help us think, as they say, outside the box, to bring highly innovative and inspiring ideas that also show us good results and that we can adapt to the local context, and beyond, making a significant impact. And then this series, this library, let's say, as we like to call it, a library, a repository with a series of documents that will be the results of the project. We don't want the project to be one that leaves documents in a drawer, but rather an open library so that these documents can indeed remain accessible and that future projects or initiatives can truly benefit from the experience we have actually developed. Well, particularly noteworthy is a workshop course requested by the National Institute of Water Resources, the INDRAI of the Dominican Republic, for the Redondos boards, understanding that, as Marcelo mentioned, especially in the case of the Dominican Republic, there is significant agricultural activity where the actors are important players in the economy and also in risk management. So we have been specifically asked to allocate a workshop course designed to meet the specific needs and preferences of the stakeholders present here today. I believe I have given you a general overview of the project, what we have accomplished, and the challenges we face this year. I hope, of course, that you will have the chance to join us in many of these activities from now on. and that this will also serve as an invitation to join us in that MOOC, in which we have placed a lot of expectations because we understand it is something innovative. So we look forward to seeing all of you at our upcoming activities. Thank you very much. Marcelo, back to you.
Thank you very much, Elmira, for the detailed presentation, which clearly highlights, as mentioned at the beginning, a people-centered project indeed. And I believe you have also indeed, in fact, actually emphasized that a significant portion of the people we refer to in this project are children, who are indeed a priority, the senior citizens, and women with those gender issues you mentioned, and especially the senior citizens with multiple degrees of disabilities, for whom it is not always easy to make decisions when facing a critical situation, and especially in such scenarios. So I believe that this project, as presented, clearly addresses a new people-centered dimension, which on the other hand is based on education, communication, and focused on the media, which is undoubtedly one of the new approaches. I mean, we all know kids don't listen to the radio or even watch TV much anymore. Today, it's all streaming or social media on their phones. Therefore, it seems extremely valuable to me that the project focuses on this dimension, indeed. Well, to continue this webcast for the presentation and launch of the educational platform, it is truly indeed a great pleasure for me to now at this moment introduce Dr. Alan Label, possibly one of the most influential people from whom we have all learned, those of us who are dedicated to the field of risk management. Dr. Alain Labelle, a graduate of the University of London, from his bachelor's degree in economic geography to his doctorate in the same field, has actually settled in our Latin America for more than 30 years, living in Costa Rica and developing a significant part of his work there. He is a recognized expert with, as mentioned, 30 years of experience. He is currently the research secretary of Flaxo in Central America and has been one of the promoters of the non-governmental organization La Red and of La Red's inventory, which coincidentally has to do with the initial efforts that have been developed to systematize all the information. It is my pleasure to introduce the renowned and respected Dr. Alan Labelle, who will provide us with a comprehensive and detailed overview of the topic of disaster risk management worldwide and the new and innovative approaches emerging in this field so that we can thoroughly draw some conclusions at the end. Go ahead, Alan. It's a pleasure to have you with us in this webcast today.
My name is Alan Labelle. When we look at what is the central theme of this particular project, it falls within what today is called compensatory risk management. In a lot of Latin America, in a lot of UN literature, in the World Bank, and in other areas, it's called other things in other places. And if we look back to the past and we remember what was familiarly called the disaster cycle, which was set up in the 70s, grew in the 80s with institutions like OFDA, the Office for Foreign Disaster Assistance, PAHO, the health organization with the United Nations, where they talked about before, during, and after disaster. The whole idea of compensatory risk management, and compensatory because what you're doing is compensating for the existence of a residual risk in society. That is, you're compensating through different actions because risk exists which has not been reduced, eliminated, or avoided in the first place. And so this whole idea of the before, during and after disaster impact is now captured in this notion of compensatory disaster risk management, which in fact goes beyond the immediately before and the during the impact to follow up with the ideas of reconstruction, rehabilitation, recovery, and now resilience building and social and adaptation protection. Consequently, this whole notion of after or very close to after impact, by that I mean to say the previous period when an event is announced but has not happened yet. There are a whole series of activities which take place which we call preparedness in terms of response plans, early warning systems, and now what is called early action or anticipatory action, etc., are all within what we call compensatory risk management. And it's what we have to have because we simply have not got on top of reduced or controlled the growth of disaster risk in society in a structural manner. That is, we've let it go, we've built hospitals badly, we've put hospitals in wrong places, we've built our roads badly, as Dominica suffered massive destruction during the hurricanes in 2017, a lot because risk was not included in the principle of building infrastructure, road and port and housing infrastructure, etc. And so when we look at this topic of near to and after disaster impact and reconstructing the sequence, and here we tend to get new, what we can call kids on the block, things that didn't exist in the nomenclatures in our thought process 40 years ago, 30 years ago, but because of the circumstances associated with disaster have been included more and more. Thus, originally we were with preparedness, including early warning, with humanitarian response, rehabilitation and reconstruction. Nowadays we have preparedness, including early warning, we have immediate humanitarian response, but prior to that we have what we're calling anticipatory action. And then after that, instead of just reconstruction, we now have recovery, which is qualitatively different. Resilience building, which is a thing of this century. It was not on the books prior to the early 2000s when resilience came into the terminologies and notions associated with disaster. And the whole thing of resilience building and social adaptation and protection are very recent things. And they've grown because of what we found out about disaster. So if we take, for instance, the whole idea of early action, anticipatory action, which is being promoted widely by many institutions worldwide, pushed a lot by the Germans at one time and pushed by others during other times. What basically is in play is a continuity of early warning where, because we have the means to identify the possible impact of an event in a longer time period previous to it occurring, we are in a position to think about advancing financial payments amongst other types of resources, such that people who are going to be affected by an event can take a whole series of actions which will lower the loss they suffer when the event occurs. Previously, this wasn't possible because the time period of announcing a coming event was probably not sufficient. But this has also happened because we know that in financial mechanisms which have been developed by the World Bank, the Inter-American Development Bank, by Caribbean and Central American banks to talk of this region, that financial conditions were established whereby countries, through insurance schemes or other types of financial mechanism, have access quickly once an event had in fact impacted to try to get on top of the whole response problem. So this anticipatory action, which is now follows early warning, is like a response to that type of financial mechanism, provided because we are able to do it, because we now know with more time period prior that an event is going to occur. And so what I want to say with this is a highly complex area in which multiple different stages exist, which require different resources, different capabilities, have different objectives, but in some way or another are all related to each other. Consequently, if with early warning, that is, letting people know an event is going to occur in a particular place, affecting particular people with a particular intensity, if we can in fact develop that capacity and on the basis of that encourage people to move out of the areas of maximum hazard, although it is temporarily, to hazard shelters or whatever, if they can move their goods to a certain extent and protect them, if they can board up their houses to protect them from hurricanes, etc., then inevitably this is going to influence in the type of and level of the support required when anticipatory action mechanisms are put on board. The more you lower risk, residual risk, with anticipatory early warning systems, the less anticipatory action supposedly you would have to take. And consequently, humanitarian response would be a much easier flowing scheme, not requiring the same level of attention as we give it today, precisely because so much residual risk exists in society, which has not in a really convincing way been reduced sufficiently to make people feel more secure or to be in more secure conditions. And of course, the level of damage which occurs to a society during an event is determining of what will happen with rehabilitation, recovery and reconstruction. If you can avoid to the maximum through early warning systems and through anticipatory action and other processes the existence of risk, then obviously your reconstruction, recovery and other phases of resilience building will be considerably less onerous. But basically what has happened is that residual risk is extremely high in many places, and the Caribbean is one of those very places where vulnerability, exposure to hazard is extremely high, and the countries of the Caribbean appear in the lists of risk-prone countries, many of them very high up the scale of risk proneness, etc. And so what we have to accept with preparedness, resilience building, is it is a measure maybe we can call of last resort. It's a last resort we would wish not to have to go to, but because precisely of social conditions, we have to go to it. And therefore it requires a great deal of attention, a great deal of resources, a great deal of capacity building, because the fact is disasters are going to occur. And that's not a negative, catastrophic opinion. The fact is there's so much risk on the ground today that it is inevitable when events not even of extreme nature, Irma or Maria, like people in the Caribbean know very well that even hurricanes of lower intensity interacting with societies that are highly vulnerable and highly exposed suffers immense levels of risk, whereas societies which are better built in order to withstand the strain associated with hazards suffer less. Recently there was the 7.4 earthquake in Taiwan, the strongest earthquake in 25 years, and the amount of damage associated with and death was relatively minimal. I think I heard in the last report that something like 6 people died. Buildings were affected, but the overall impact on the economy does not even compare to what happened to Haiti in 2010, with probably an earthquake below the size of a Taiwan earthquake. So we know that vulnerability and exposure are critical things. So that deals with what we call and are calling nowadays compensatory disaster risk management actions, strategies or principles, dealing with residual risk, that is risk that because of intervention by the state, by the private sector, by civil society has not been reduced or was allowed to grow, and therefore it exists as a residual component and must be dealt with through these early warning, soon after, immediately after, or for a longer period of time after, types of strategies which I've laid out in the first part. A lot of the concentration on response to disaster comes from way back and is in some way very interrelated to what was the interpretative paradigm associated with disaster. And this was captured in this term, which UN has been trying to get rid of for years, but people persist in using, of natural disaster. The idea that disasters were natural, the hazards basically were the disaster, society was innocent, the disaster hazard would decide who was affected in some way. And therefore, under circumstances where little could be done by human beings, and these are interpretations which lead into religious interpretations of disaster as well, etc., where people cannot do too much about it. It is almost inevitable. It is obvious that response and preparedness for response and reconstruction were seen some time ago as being the principal strategies to take on disaster risk. You had to deal with it once it happened. Over the last 50 years in particular, and particularly over the last 20 or 30, that paradigm of interpreting disaster, natural disaster, disasters are inevitable, disasters do not announce themselves, has been replaced by a paradigm, what we call the social construction of risk, which in its simplest terms is indicating that disaster risk, and therefore disaster, is constructed by us, human beings, collectively, individually, as families, as companies, as government, different expressions of social organisation which lead to different ways of leading your lives, undertaking your lives, constructing your lives, and what you do with your lives. And it isn't a matter of a hazard automatically affecting societies. And so this whole social construction of risk paradigm, which is basically based originally on the idea of vulnerability, that is, human beings suffer different levels of proneness to being damaged according to their social position, according to ethnicity, according to their age, according to gender considerations, is in fact the basis of the social construction of risk. Consequently, when you come to response and early warning and preparedness, you have to take into account these differential factors that in fact lead to some people being more vulnerable, more exposed than others, and likely to suffer considerably more damage. And for that reason, within the framework of the webinars, this whole idea of psychosocial impacts, the whole idea of protecting your home and protecting your family is highly significant. And for organizations interacting with society, they must understand fully that different people are under different stress conditions. Not everybody is open to the same risk, even if the hazard is of the same intensity. So this whole social construction notion has led to the idea and the questioning in people, well, if risk is constructed, risk can be deconstructed. What do we mean by that? If we have contributed through bad land use patterns, planning processes, through degradation of our environment, through locating in inadequate areas, hazard-prone areas, plus a whole series of other processes which lead to risk being constructed in society, then theoretically we can deconstruct that risk. And here the argument I'd like to put forward is definitely compensatory risk management is absolutely fundamental, precisely because the risk we've constructed is relatively unmanageable. It has not been managed, it has not been reduced. Therefore, we have to invest large resources in response, in preparedness. But we know, as time goes by and the complexity associated with disaster increases, the systemic effects, that is, something happens to your bridge in your community, but that's not the end of it. Your bridge is how you transport your goods to markets and get goods from markets into your community. So if a bridge falls or a hospital falls with an event, it's not just that loss that is important. It is the loss that generates in other things, which can be local, national, and even international. And a lot of systemic risk nowadays associated with destruction of some facilities in some part of the world highly affect what happens in other parts of the world. So to take an example close to us, the Panama Canal today is in fact running at a lower capacity than it can because the water basin which supplies the water for the canal is drying up. So the ships cannot cross the canal. That does not only affect Panama, that affects all of the countries that receive the goods on those boats that pass through the canal from Pacific to Atlantic or Atlantic to Pacific, and it has a wider global impact. And so we know that this type of risk is growing and growing because of a complexity of new risk drivers, things like unplanned urban development, climate change, of course, with its effects on recurrence and intensity of events, and many other that we don't have time to get into. But the singular conclusion is that risk is in fact growing, and we have to do something about that. Another fact is that if you look at the money invested in humanitarian response, in preparedness, it is going down in comparison with growing need. That is to say, there is a large gap and a growing gap between the finance made available to undertake compensatory risk management principles, rebuild, respond, etc., and what is the called for amount by international agencies, United Nations and others. And consequently, in the end, it's a non-sum game. There's no way of dealing with this unless we do reduce overall risk in society ex ante the occurrence of events. But a lot of what is seen to be finance for humanitarian response, some people see that as being money which is competitive with, or the other way around, that money for disaster risk prevention and mitigation, what we're calling corrective and prospective disaster risk management, is seen by some to compete with humanitarian resources. And it is obvious that humanitarian resources will win out because of a political imperative, the human and ethical imperative about responding to disasters. So all of this growing risk in society is not attended to adequately, finance is not put into it, investment is not put into it. But that in many ways is a false argument, although it is an argument, because what we find is that what we should be dealing with in what we call corrective prospective risk management, that is, getting rid of risk that's on the ground prior to the impact of an event, retrofitting your hospital, relocating your community, strengthening the dikes around your community, strengthening the dams so they don't burst in high periods of flooding, etc. That is corrective. It is getting rid of risk we built at some time in the past. Prospective is guaranteeing that that risk does not exist in the first place. So if you plan your land use planning well, if you don't degrade your environment, if through your national investment systems and investment processes, you demand that risk is considered in the investment, and when you build your roads and your houses, they can respond to and resist hazards in the future, you would not have to invest in this. So it's not a matter of taking money from humanitarian resources. It is a matter of using development resources in a better way. A whole series of other things can occur. But what we're establishing here is not a division between, but certainly a classification between what we're calling ex-ante, corrective and prospective disaster risk reduction, which is getting at the structural causes and the underlying causes of building up risk in society. That risk, which communities, when they use early warning systems, will recognize and will be the basis of what they do, and it will be the basis of how much they, in commas, suffer or impacted by the event, how much it affects them materially, how much it affects them psychosocially, how much it affects them culturally in terms of their history, their lost accumulation of knowledge and history over time. That is what will decide that, and that is what we have to think of in the light of response to disasters, and search for these two things to be more balanced in the approaches, the human resources and financial resources which are dedicated to them. And that brings me to the last point in this sort of very rapid fireside conversation on disaster risk in society. That is, as you practice compensatory mechanisms such as early warning, anticipatory action, even immediate response, and more so when you practice recovery and reconstruction, you can think about something more than residual risk. That is, overcoming the adverse conditions which exist when the event impacts you. And you can start to think about structural risk, because you have all the tools to do it and the experience to do it. Consequently, when you do an early warning system, it is based on what we call risk analysis, identifying who is at risk, why are they at risk, who are located in inadequate places, who are occupying houses that are not going to withstand the hurricane or the flooding or the earthquake, etc. That is a basic part of planning for early warning and early action as an adjunct to early warning. So if you have that information, the population is actively involved in that analysis, you can stimulate the population and groups which support it to think beyond reducing residual risk and start to think about reducing structural risk. It's sort of the questions which people in La Masica in Honduras asked themselves following the impact of Mitch. This was a community that had an early warning system since the 80s, stimulated by work by the Organization of American States and the German government, and they had an excellent participatory early warning system which allowed them to avoid any deaths during Mitch, when municipalities around them were losing people in large quantities or in significant quantities of people. And they also managed to protect their environment, their livelihoods, by moving cattle to safe places, etc., etc. But as a result of that, these people, with the guidance of NGOs, etc., started to think, well, why are we running at the last moment? Why don't we reduce risk structurally prior to the impact of the event? And so changes came about in land use patterns where people were living, not living so close to the river, living back from the river. And this can happen with sea level rise, etc. You can take anticipatory action, but it does require collaboration, resources, knowledge bases. With what you do in response, incorporation of the people that are likely to be affected in the whole decision-making process and the organisation processes facilitates the construction of social capital, which will become very useful when you start to think, and once the event has passed, what can I do to avoid this type of stress in the future? And undoubtedly, and here we will finalise, when you come to reconstruction and recovery, it is clear that you cannot reconstruct and recover replicating the existence you had prior to the event. If you are going to rebuild and reconstruct and recover to the same extent as you existed before with the same conditions, then the only thing you can hope for is the next big event will lead to the same type of damage. It is obvious when you reconstruct a hospital that has been destroyed, you have to build it to better building standards. When a building is like the hospital in Honduras, in Tegucigalpa with Mitch, a hospital located on the floodplain of a river was flooded to the second floor or third floor. It's obvious you cannot rebuild the hospital in that same position without in the end suffering the consequence of a future event of similar or lower magnitude. So the message I'm trying to pass here is that the topic of this project, which is absolutely fundamental, is one part of a whole machine, to put it that way. It is one part of this machine we call disaster risk management, which has the different modalities: corrective risk management, prospective risk management, and compensatory risk management. Corrective and prospective risk management search to avoid the need for compensatory actions, early warning, or to the degree in which it is done. But we can also look to these early warning and response mechanisms, the compensatory mechanisms, to build into themselves through adequate planning and strategic thought, actions which in fact stimulate people to think about and finally provide them with the resources to do something structural about the risk they live under. And consequently, both have to work together. We cannot work in the future just with compensatory mechanisms, because the compensatory mechanisms we need are going to grow and grow in the future if the predictions about climate change are true. And here, remember, as a last point, the IPCC and world governments, the whole negotiation principle over climate change, has always fixed 1.5 degrees centigrade, maximum above the historical level of the average climate in the world. That was overcome last year in 2023. According to the European Climate Organization and confirmed by NASA, we've now broken the bounds of 1.5, and 2024 is likely to be even hotter, going up to 1.55 or something like that. These are predictions, obviously, for the future. The data for the 23 is real. Climate change is real. It is increasing intensities and recurrence of events. It is also fostering recurrent, smaller scale events. More and more, we're getting into a world where these types of hazards become part of the routine and the norm, and we have to deal with them in that way. They're no longer extraordinary events, many of them. They are more and more part of the everyday, and we have to be able to deal with them prospectively, correctively, and in a compensatory fashion. So with that, I'll finish, hoping that in some way it has been clear enough to understand a complex topic in a short time. And I wish you well with the rest of the webinars and with the project which is being promoted by UNESCO today and in the future.
Thank you very much, Alan, for this presentation, which has also been accompanied and enriched by some images that position and orient us with the project, and in some way allow all of us who will be involved in the organization of the online course, clearly presented by Selmira and the webinar series, to offer it to the Caribbean community, not only to the 5 target countries of this project, but also to extend the project to other places, indeed, very significantly and extensively. And it is no less important to mention that the collaborators, in this case the government of Japan, have also invited us to compare and extrapolate some of our activities to other areas of the world that are subject to and face challenges in risk management, such as typhoons, specifically in the Sea of Japan, the China Sea, and also for other countries that do not necessarily deal with hurricanes, but will surely find the rich availability of training and education elements on how to truly address these challenges that risk management entails, especially tropical storms and hurricanes, and therefore, in particular, in various regions, in the context of, and specifically in terms of, and furthermore, And just to close, I would like to mention that part of our team, which, as I would like to emphasize, has an absolutely and undeniably transdisciplinary focus, something not so common or usual in this type of project, ranging from technological sciences to social and behavioral sciences, something, I insist, not always common or typical in capacity building courses. This is very important to us because in this season of the year 2024, it has already been forecasted and predicted by the University of Colorado through its Hurricane Center and the USA organization, which is responsible for making the yearly forecasts, that we are going to have an extremely active and very eventful 2024, where a very significant increase in the number of various, diverse, and different events is expected, including a good number, approximately more than 30 major events, that is, hurricane categories. Therefore, we believe that this truly people-centered course will address challenges that we hope will not occur as predicted this year, but if they do, we can also provide updated and almost real-time tools for those who have to face these types of challenges, and above all, preserve life and trust that each person in themselves can have tools on how to truly remember. Sometimes the lack of information causes people to make incorrect decisions because maybe the message didn't arrive on time or the message was incorrect. Having precision in the message and understanding how to interpret it and make your own decisions is the goal of this project, and we believe that we will precisely address this in a precise manner throughout the entire menu of options that Selmira has presented. It has truly been a great honor and pleasure for me to give a presentation alongside these incredibly talented and exceptionally gifted speakers throughout this entire project. We invite you, as indicated by Selmira, to join our online course. Please attend and watch these webinars, which are short webinars of no more than around 40 minutes. We will probably hold them with a frequency of once or at most twice a month. It's 1 hour a day that one can dedicate to these topics. But as Selmira presented, there are topics that are not always addressed, and it is very important to take them into account because beyond going to public policies, we focus on people and how to help them survive and self-protect. It has been a pleasure, and I will see you very soon. Thank you very much.